feel like your period is one of those things that you can track for more chronic issues. As soon as you start to see shifts in your periods, that's when you know something's going on. And if you can kind of catch it earlier, that's always better than waiting, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years more before you start to address it. If you start to see one cycle be off and then that seems to be a pattern for the next couple of cycles, that's when you're like, okay, what's going on? Where do we need to start addressing things? So that's why I really love talking about hormones, looking at your cycles, tracking your periods, tracking ovulation, really figuring out what's going on in your body. It's your body and nobody else is going to know it and understand it like you do.
Welcome to the SALT Podcast, where we talk about all things simple. Yep, simple anointed living tips. I'm your host, Jenny Peña. So I've been sharing on my Instagram a little bit about my whole postpartum journey and a little bit about how my cycle started up again after over 2 years of nursing my smallest baby. Somehow, I don't know how, but thankfully, Dr. Saru's Instagram popped up on my feed and all this information that I truly needed. So when I started thinking about who to invite on this podcast, I just had to invite you. So thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for inviting me.
And I just want everyone to know a little bit about you and, what you offer and what you specialize in. If you could just give us a little glimpse.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a naturopathic doctor. So I'm a little bit more trained in kind of the integrative side of things, as well as some of the primary care side of the conventional world. So kind of in the middle of both the Western and Eastern, I guess. So I focus primarily on women's health, particularly in hormonal regulation for women with kind of chronic hormonal issues. So whether that's PMS or heavy periods or painful periods, PCOS, thyroid disorders affecting their periods, irregular bleeding, any of these issues, that's kind of what I work on with women. And I work on doing that in a way that you don't need to use any pharmaceuticals. I try to do it as natural as possible in a way that gets you kind of in your body, understanding what's going on and how to best treat yourself, kind of getting to know your body a little bit more.
And I think that's why I was so glued and so drawn to your Instagram, because anyone, especially a doctor, talking about, empowering women to get to know their own bodies and use natural ways to help and support your body, especially with hormonal health, is so out there. Like, I feel like growing up, I never ever had any of that. Like, I didn't know any of that, and sadly neither did my mom. So we just listened to whatever our gyno or whatever, whoever told us what to do. So I'm so glad that that you decided to focus on that. But what drew you to specialize in this?
I always wanted to do pediatrics and women's health. And I think after actually, becoming a doctor and seeing that it's really hard to kind of be a specialist in multiple areas. And so I was like, you know what, I'm really going to focus on women's health, because that's just where we really need a lot more work, is with hormonal care. And so that's kind of where it started. And my goal is really to see healthier overall communities and societies, because I really think that starts with women and children, because we're kind of the ones taking care, like children are the future generation and women are kind of the ones creating those children. And so if we can create healthier women to have healthier babies, that can kind of create a shift in our health in our overall society. So that's kind of where I was coming from, wanting to do peds and women's health. And I think the women's health aspect just kind of took off a little bit more. And I felt that was also just an area of neglect where we're not really, every mom is kind of bending over backwards to take care of their child and do what's best and organic for their kid, but no mom is taking care of herself. And so I really wanted to make sure that women kind of had more information about what's going on with their bodies, what's a normal period, what should your hormones be doing, what's healthy for you, so that we can take care of ourselves and also the future generation.
Goodness, that is a mission, woman. Thank you. I am so happy that you decided to dedicate your life to this because I am sure you are blessing so many women.
Oh,
And I love the little words that you have for us, basically. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I honestly have no idea where it started. I just liked the play on words. Chickpeas are one of
Mhm.
my favorite legumes. I don't eat a ton of meat, and so I eat a lot of chickpeas. And chickpeas is like a little, as women, I don't know. I have no idea why that
I love
started.
it though.
Yeah, and people really seem to like it, and I liked it. I like having a little term for my community, so it just kind of just clicked, and it worked.
All right, so we are, as of now, all of Dr. Saru's chickpeas, by the way,
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
If you have no idea what I'm talking about, go on her Instagram and basically read pretty much any of her posts, and she will be referring to us as chickpeas. And I love it. I'm here for it.
I love it.
So, how did you grow up with like hormonal issues that you were like had to navigate around and picked up a few things with like your own experience and in helping your own body out?
I did not have hormonal issues per se. My biggest issues were gut issues. I was diagnosed with IBD at a really young age. I was 13. And
Mm-hmm.
I just was like in and out of doctors and hospitals and surgeries. And it was just a really
Cool.
rough time in my life. And they finally, they put me on really harsh medications that you would only put like, much older adults on. And I was only 13. I was still developing. I had just gotten my period. And that really kind of messed up my cycles a little bit. And my whole health was just kind of at a really low point at that time. And
Wow.
so my mom and I just kind of put our heads together. And when I say my mom and I was 13 at the time, so really it was my mom. She was
Oh, yeah.
she saw me struggling. She was not a huge fan of all the medications either. She was a
Yeah.
nurse, so she was in that world, and she was like, I don't want to be putting my
Oh.
13-year-old child on all this stuff. And so she kind of looked into more alternative things. We did a lot of Ayurveda, we did a lot of gut healing, we did a lot of like just things naturally, naturopathically to heal my gut. And I came such a long way after that without having to take any medications, but still having,
Oh.
diagnosis IBD. And so that's kind of where that whole journey began. And then when I was in college, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and she was
Oh,
not really
sorry.
given a great prognosis. And so she didn't want to do the chemo route. She opted for a natural route. And so she did all of that and kind of turned her life around. And that was when I was like, okay,
Whew.
there's so much more to medicine than we're really getting told. And I wanted to explore that route and see, because nobody here was giving her any hope. And the only people that actually gave her any hope were naturopathic doctors. And so I was like, you know what, I really need to explore that route. And so that's how I got into this whole field of medicine, was my own experiences, watching my mom go through that. Really kind of changed the direction of where I wanted to go. I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. I just didn't know that
Mhm.
I wanted to be this kind of doctor until later on. So I'm really glad that I had those experiences. They were not easy, to say the least, but I'm glad that they happened, because, I am now here today because of it.
Exactly. Like we can't just, say, "Oh my God, this happened to me," and like put ourselves in like that victim mentality. It's like,
Exactly.
wow, look, because of all of that, where I
Mm-hmm.
am now and the experience and the wisdom that you have now for
Totally.
yourself, for your mom, and now how many women are you touching? How many lives are you touching? And how long have you had your Instagram now?
Not very long. I think I got it um, fall of 2019.
Yeah, I feel like I just started following you and you had like a few posts only. And then all of a sudden, like I told you, I'm like, I check on your page every now and then. All of a sudden, you are like over 15,000 followers. And then I'm like, the other day I looked again, I'm like over 20,000 followers. Like,
Yeah,
how
I don't
did that
know.
happen?
honestly, I think a couple of reels went viral and that's where it all came from. It's been kind of stagnant since then though. So, the growth has kind of slowed down, but all of a sudden there was a huge boom and I was like, oh my God, I was just so overwhelmed. And then it slowed down a little bit, which is making it more manageable for me because I'm like, okay, it was hard to kind of keep up with that huge influx. And I know, I like to be engaged with everybody that's there and I like to make sure that I'm responding to as many people as I can. So having a huge influx all at once was a little bit like, oh my God, I can't also do my personal life and take care of all my community. So I'm grateful that it slowed down a little bit so I can kind of keep up and like answer everybody and have that more intimate kind of community.
What were you like thinking? Like, I'm gonna start an Instagram and just share about like these certain topics. Like, what was your plan?
I really just wanted people to be educated about their bodies, about their hormones. I felt like there was not a ton out there, and social media and health had just kind of started emerging. Like, I feel like a lot of people are now using social media to kind of learn about all this stuff. And so I was like, you know what, why not? Like, I feel like it's a great platform to share education about, and most of the users on social media are women of the age group that I'm targeting anyway. So I'm like, why not educate them about their bodies a little bit more? And I'm really grateful that it took off the way it did because I love being able to help and educate as many women as possible. I feel like education is my main goal as a naturopathic doctor. Even with all my patients, when I'm working one-on-one, my main goal is to educate them about what's going on with their body, why we're doing any of the treatments that we're doing. And so if I can, help to educate people even without working with them one-on-one, that's even more amazing.
Oof, yes, more power to you. I pray that like all the women can just come and learn from you. Like, I've already shared your posts and everything. I think the first one that I saw was about seed cycling, I think. And I was like, what? I have never heard of this. And so many posts that you have over and over again, even still today, because I think recently you posted about gut health. And I was like, really? Even gut health? Okay, there's way more to this than we can like even talk about in this podcast today. So let's keep it, for the sake of women who are first starting off, figuring out, okay, I need to start paying attention to my body. I need to start, understanding what is my body telling me, what are these symptoms, and how the hormonal part all fits in. So is there like a starting place? Like, first of all, what is like all this hormonal talk? Like, why is it so important? Is that a good starting place, or is there something like even before talking about hormonal health, like women's health in general?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, our hormones are kind of the biggest part of what we identify in our health as women. And I think the reason that it is so important, I think, is because your periods are like another vital sign. They tell you so much about what's going on in your body and what's happening from a deeper perspective than, I feel like other vital signs can tell you. Vital signs are really great for acute things, but I feel like your period is one of those things that you can track for more chronic issues. As soon as you start to see shifts in your periods, that's when something's going on. And if you can kind of catch it earlier, that's always better than waiting, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years more before you start to address it. If you start to see one cycle be off and then that seems to be a pattern for the next couple of cycles, that's when you're like, okay, what's going on? Where do we need to start addressing things? So that's why I really love talking about hormones, looking at your cycles, tracking your periods, tracking ovulation, really figuring out what's going on in your body. It's your body and nobody else is going to know it and understand it like you do. So when you're in tune with your body, you can be more likely and you're just going to be more likely to know when something's off. Like, I get so many women who are like, I went to the doctor and I have all these issues and they said I'm fine. But they know they're not fine. And so it's really frustrating to be dismissed like that. And so the more you know your body, the more you can say, you know what, no, I know I'm not fine. I'm going to look a little bit deeper. I'm going to figure out what's going on. And for most people, they go to their doctor and they just trust that their doctor is like, yeah, well, you're not, nothing's wrong, so nothing's wrong. And they're just like, okay, my doctor said I'm fine. And so if you know what's going on, if you can understand why your body is doing something, I think it'll just give you more power and more autonomy over your own health and your own body.
For sure. And I've witnessed that over and over again. And surprisingly, my husband was the one that started helping me address these things, because when I first met him, a little over 12 years ago now, he was the one that knew more about it than I did about health and, like you said, using your cycle as a vital sign. Mm-hmm. And wow, something is not right if your cycle is off by more than, a certain amount of days, right? Like, what are like a few things that women can look at to say, okay, maybe you need to look at this to figure out, how to have, I don't know, better emotional health and mental health and all these different symptoms that we get because our cycles are off.
Yeah, so the main things that I like to track in a cycle are how many days are you bleeding? How many days are in between your cycles? So that's day 1 to day 1 of one period to another. So usually I like to make sure that those days are consistent. So if you have, a 26-day cycle, but that's every month you're having a 26-day cycle, that's fine. If you have a 26-day cycle 1 month, and then the next month it's 34, and then the month after that it's 30, and it's just inconsistent like that, even though it's within a range of 26 to 34 days of the normal range, it's still inconsistent for you, which is telling me that's a little bit irregular. So you may not be ovulating every cycle, or you may be ovulating at different times. I just want to make sure that that is still in fact normal and you are ovulating regularly. So just knowing when your cycles happen, I think just tracking your cycles or when you start your period is really helpful. And then going back to the number of days that you're bleeding, that's also really important, because if you're only bleeding for a couple of days, that's usually indicative of, hey, maybe your estrogen levels are too low or something's going on there, or maybe you're not ovulating. And then if you're bleeding more than 7 days, that's telling us that maybe your estrogen levels are high, maybe your progesterone levels are low, maybe there's some, you have excess overall inflammation or stress or something going on in your body that's causing that excess bleeding and heavy bleeding. And so at that point, we would want to check in on your hormones as well. And so anything, between 2 and 7 days can be normal. Anything less or more is when we're like, let's check that out. And then other things that I like to track would be your ovulation. You can track that in a few different ways. That would be a whole nother podcast. So I would say, look into tracking ovulation and seeing what works best for you. There are a few different methods. You can track your cervical mucus. You can track your LH. You can track basal body temperature. You can track cervical positioning. So there's a lot of different things to look at when you're tracking ovulation. You can do 1, you can do 2, you can do a combination of all of them, whatever works best for you, so that when you're ovulating is going to be really important. So that also tells me how long your luteal phase is. Your luteal phase is from ovulation to the next time you start your period. And if you have a really short luteal phase, that can be the cause of some PMS symptoms, some issues with irritability, emotions, and stuff like that. And so really, there's just so much information you can get from just tracking your cycles, which is easy to do. You do it at home. You don't have to buy a kit or buy, fancy equipment. It's something you do at home that just gives you more information about your body. And also me as a provider, I get to know so much more about your body just from that objective information you gathered without having to do lab work and blood testing and expensive testing. So, I think tracking your cycles is such an underrated piece of your health that we should all be doing.
Yeah. And you mentioned about the luteal phase, which is after ovulation, towards the days going towards your next day 1, right? Your next period. Mm-hmm. What if you said if it's short that it can cause like higher PMS, like issues, right? It's like, what if it's
Mhm.
a longer luteal phase?
So usually if you are ovulating pretty regularly, you won't have a luteal phase that lasts longer than 2 weeks because that's just as long as that corpus luteum can last before you start to menstruate again. So I don't generally see a really long luteal phase, or at least not one that lasts for more than 2 weeks. If you think that you might have a longer luteal phase, you may not be tracking ovulation correctly, or you may not be catching ovulation right when it's happening. So generally, we don't see super long luteal phases. It's usually, 2 weeks or it's shorter than that.
Oh, okay. All right. So moving along.
Yeah.
What have you seen that women have the most um, symptoms of, like that they come to you the most about?
Probably painful periods or irregular periods or heavy periods. Those are the three that I see most often.
And are there ways that we can what things that we can do to overcome those three different things?
Yeah. So I would say it really depends. I mean, that is where I love naturopathic medicine because every single person is different. And so it really depends on what's going on um with your body and your health. So looking at, I mean, painful periods is going to be a little bit different than heavy periods, which is going to be definitely very different from irregular periods. So in my visit with everybody, I like to do a very thorough intake of what's going on with your gut health. How are you sleeping? How are your energy levels? What are you eating? What's your nutrition like? How are you exercising? How are you managing stress? All of these pieces that
Wow.
are going to influence all of your health and your hormones overall, and really get an idea of where in the piece are you having some issues. Is it with your energy levels? Is it with your gut health? Are you having a lot of gas and bloating? Do you have constipation, or do you have looser stools? Where do we start there with fixing that? Otherwise, I also like to do blood work and other testing to really look at your hormones. Do you have any anemia? Do you have a thyroid issue? Do you have iron deficiencies? What's going on with your hormones? How are your progesterone levels? Really kind of digging deeper to see where is the issue for you, because it could be gut health, it could be stress, it could be related to your nutrition, it could be related to exercise. So there's so many different root causes for different people. So I like to kind of get a good baseline of what is it for you that we need to start addressing first. And most often, gut health is kind of the common denominator there. So we will always start with gut health for most people.
Oh, really? Okay. So why is it gut health that's for most people the issue, do you think? Or that you've seen in your experience?
Yeah, so your gut, I think, and as more research comes out, we're finding that your gut plays a huge role in just regulating everything. 80% of our immune system is within our gut. And so your immune system is what is regulating inflammation. And that is going to be a huge factor for hormonal issues. And that's a huge factor there's also insulin resistance. It's a huge factor for thyroid issues. It's a huge factor for stress management. And so there's just a lot that happens in the gut. And I think it's just so underrated. And especially in the Western world, most of our diets are not adequate for good gut health. And so our diet and our lifestyle, most of us are
Well,
pretty sedentary, especially with the pandemic
yeah.
now. More people are much more sedentary.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think just both of those in general, most people end up having gut health issues. And I know, people who travel abroad are like, oh, all of my gut issues disappeared. So it's a huge issue here in America in particular, that, the quality of our food is not great, sadly. So that's a huge factor that plays a role that, we can mitigate to some degree, buying specific products, organic, whatever. But again, we have what's available to us here, and we're kind of limited in that. So that plays a big factor as well.
So where would you say someone could begin with, like, addressing their gut health? Like,
Yeah.
start where? Obviously,
I
you
would
just said with
say,
your food intake, right?
yeah, absolutely. And nutrition is always, always, always going to be the biggest piece of the pyramid. adding supplements is kind of more towards the top of the pyramid. It's going to be helpful, but only after you've addressed all the bottom pieces to kind of build that foundation. So nutrition is always the best place to start, including more fiber, more veggies, more fruits, more whole foods in general. So if you're finding that you're eating out a lot, or you're eating from boxes a lot, or you're just eating a lot of processed foods, I would say start first with just adding veggies, adding fruits, adding whole grains into your diet. I don't like to start with just taking away first. I like to say, where are you at? And then if you're already doing those things and you're already mostly eating whole foods, then I would say start with finding out maybe some food intolerances, because that's another thing that a lot of people have, again, especially in this country, is food intolerances. So really seeing, okay, if I cut out dairy for a month, how did I feel? Did some of my symptoms resolve? How about gluten? How about soy or alcohol or sugar? There's a lot. Those are kind of the main ones that we see most often, especially in hormonal issues, is those few things that I just mentioned. So that's usually where I start, is just cut something out, see how you feel, test it out. It's really, knowing your body is kind of an experiment. It's something that that will always be changing. So you can't just be like, well, I know, this interacts with me and then I'm good for the rest of my life, because your body's always changing. Your cells turn over, life happens, things change. So it's kind of this never ending experiment that we do with our bodies of seeing what works with us. If you cut out a certain food for like a year or two, you may try introducing that back in, because now your body may be okay with having it in smaller amounts. So again, always just trial and error of what works for you, what doesn't. But yeah, starting with adding more whole foods. And then I would say the next thing would be addressing any food intolerances you have. And then on top of that, then I would say let's, consider adding in some supplements here and there to figure out what's going on if you have dysbiosis. But for the most part, I think just for the average person, starting with those two things are going to be the most helpful.
That's amazing. And I'm so glad that you're talking about all these different aspects, because I feel like for a lot of us, that don't know too much about hormonal health, like all the different things that can actually affect us and affect our cycle and affect us, emotionally, how you're saying, stress and all these things. And one thing that I have heard a lot of repeated, and I feel like there might be like some truth versus myths about it, is that, well, how can we have hormonal balance when our hormones are always fluctuating? And how do you address that when people, bring that to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, they're fluctuating, but at the peak of your luteal phase and your follicular phase, there's still a balance between your hormones. I think people get confused when we say balancing your hormones. It's not like they will always be right within this range forever and ever. They do fluctuate, but there's still a range within which they'll fluctuate. And that's what we mean when we say a hormonal balance. So like in your follicular phase, estrogen is the predominant hormone. So you really want to make sure that you have high levels of estrogen. You have good enough levels of estrogen to make sorry, I had to move my Roomba is coming after me. So your follicular phase is when estrogen is most dominant, and you need to make sure that is high enough so that you can build up your uterine lining during that time. And then in your follicular phase, that's when your progesterone should be more dominant than estrogen. You still have some estrogen in that second half of your cycle, but it shouldn't be the predominant.
For clarity's sake, day 1 to ovulation is follicular phase.
Yep. And ovulation to the next day that you start your period is going to be your luteal phase. And this is for people who have regular, pretty regular cycles. So I know it's different that's also how it works with irregular cycles. It's just harder to track how long each phase is when your cycle is not always coming at the same time every month.
Okay, so if I understood you correctly, the beginning of your period and the beginning of the follicular phase is when the estrogen is highest?
Yes, yeah, that's when.
And then leading to ovulation is when progesterone is highest.
Yes, exactly. So after you ovulate is when you make progesterone. So if you're not ovulating, you're not making progesterone. So that's why ovulation tracking is a huge piece, is because you need that progesterone um, for feeling good, for helping with sleep, for helping with your mood, for conception, all of these things, or sorry, for pregnancy. And so it's really important to make sure we have ovulation occurring regularly so that progesterone is also being made. And so that second half after you ovulate and your corpus luteum is producing progesterone, that should be higher than your estrogen level. So that's what we mean when we're talking about a balance, is in that luteal phase, estrogen shouldn't be higher than progesterone. So that's the balance. And if estrogen is higher, that's when we start to see quote unquote estrogen dominance. And so that's when we would say your hormones are not in balance, because the balance that we want is estrogen being lower than progesterone. So that's kind of what we say when we say balancing your hormones. I think the term gets thrown around and people get really confused by what it means, but everything's an intricate balance in our body. There's so much homeostasis and feedback mechanisms going on with everything in our body. And so to say, it's that you can't balance your hormones is just, I think it's weird to me when people say that, because everything in our body is a balance. So,
yeah, I feel that too. And so is there specific ways that when you do, I know you said that you don't like to do testing if it's not necessary, if someone can track their cycle, but when you do those times that you do have to do a hormonal test, so then how do you do it? If is there a certain time that you have to check, like at this, during these days your hormones should look like this, and if not, then
yeah, so we usually test, if you're doing blood work, you test multiple times in your cycle. I test kind of in the beginning in your follicular phase. We'll see where your estrogen levels are at. We'll also test your LH and FSH. Those are the two hormones that are helpful for ovulation, and we'll see where those are at. And then in your luteal phase, once you have ovulated, usually about a week after ovulation, because that's the peak of your luteal phase, that is when we'll test your progesterone levels and see how high are your progesterone levels, where your estrogen levels at in comparison, and see what's going on there.
Wow, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. So there are ways to test, so that maybe people just think like, oh, well, you can't just do one test and think like, okay, there's a hormone imbalance.
Right. And
no, even you don't have a hormone imbalance.
Yeah, even among blood testing, sometimes it can be less accurate. So I generally, if we're not seeing progress, I like to do the Dutch test, which is a urine test, and it tests for hormone metabolites. And it looks at so many different pieces of your hormonal health. It looks not only at estrogen and progesterone, but it looks at the metabolites of them. It looks at how your liver is processing your estrogens, and how it's methylating and doing phase 1 and phase 2 of liver metabolism through your estrogens. It does a lot of really cool stuff, and it looks at your androgens, so your testosterone and DHEA. It'll look at your cortisol regulation throughout a 24-hour period. So it gives me a lot more information to use that test in conjunction with blood testing if we're still not seeing progress in your hormonal issues.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I'm like in shock. I've like never heard of that. Everything that you just said, I'm like, what?
Yeah. Wow. Dutch testing is like, it's a great resource. Unfortunately, insurance doesn't cover it, so it's out of pocket, but which is why I kind of like to save it for, okay, we're not seeing improvements, we're kind of stuck, let's get a little bit more information. But yeah, it can definitely be helpful for kind of going a little bit further and seeing a little bit deeper into what's happening in your body.
Goodness, that's incredible. Okay, so do you see more of estrogen being higher or estrogen being lower, or what do you see the most of?
I see both directions of it, actually. It depends, because my patients with PCOS will typically have lower estrogen levels. People with thyroid issues, sometimes it could go either way, low or high. Yeah, so it really just depends on your body. I see both directions of it.
Could you tell, like, with somebody telling you their symptoms, oh, okay, you probably have low estrogen or high estrogen?
We can suspect it based on like if you have heavier periods or more painful periods, we are suspecting that quote unquote estrogen dominance. But again, sometimes I suspect that and then we test and it's not what I thought it was. So it's hard. It's hard to say exactly without fully knowing.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So like, it would be good to have a consultation with somebody that can actually tell you, like, we can look up and read all these different things, but in the end, like, if what we're doing on our own isn't working, we really need to seek, like, professional help.
Yeah, absolutely.
And get on a call, right?
Totally. Yeah, it can definitely be helpful. Especially, that's what I usually say is like, what we're here for is to help you put all those pieces of all the things that you've read on the internet into a more distilled version that's helpful for you. So I know it can be really overwhelming. I mean, I have done that too in the past of just like looking things up on the internet and trial and error and seeing what works for me, what doesn't. But I think like having somebody who has more of that expertise to help you figure out what's going to work for you, what's not going to work for you, what's actually going on in your body is really helpful because we're, not everybody has a medical background. So it's hard to kind of put all the pieces together when you're like, oh, well, this blogger said that this worked for her. And then someone else is like, no, that didn't work for me. This worked for me. And it's like, well, what's going to work for you? So really it is a lot of experimenting with your body for sure. And then at the end of the day, if you're still not seeing progress, then I would say, looking into labs, doing a further testing can always be really helpful.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure, but I think for the most part, a lot of the women that I've talked to, we have more than one child. We've had postpartum, issues like postpartum depression and super stressed, and even like to the point of like uncontrollable anger, like rage, like just getting like completely ticked off. Like, what would you say, like, what would you say to a mom that comes to you with like, I'm feeling like this and I think it has to do with my hormones? Hey, it's me, just taking a quick sec to let you know about the Pink Premium Access. Get the link for access in the show notes or heavenlytreasure.net, where you can choose monthly or yearly access options. You will get all the uncut gems hidden from the Salt podcast, plus exclusive episodes, promos from guests, Ask Me Anything episodes, and private group Zoom calls for Access members only. Sorry to hide these next gems from you. See you in the Pink Premium, and thanks for helping me keep the show alive and running. Do you have any like last message for your chickpeas who are listening, that you would like to tell them about their health, or whatever little message that you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, really just trust your body. I think in order to trust your body, you kind of have to know your body. So really get to know your body if you don't feel comfortable with it yet. Learn about your periods, learn about your ovulation, learn about what works for you. What is your gut health like? How are your poops like? Really just be in tune with your body because you only get that one body. And I don't, I think it's important to know that body pretty well.
Awesome. I love that message. And one last thing, can you tell everybody where they can find you online? Your website, your social media? Yeah,
so I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I have a newsletter. I have a website with a few blogs that I should probably update a little bit more often than I do. So I'm kind of all over the place. Wherever you feel like you want to find me, please reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
All right, and I'll be sure to put that information also in the episode notes. So if you want to just scroll up and you can see all the episode notes with all the links and resources. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us. And I really, really appreciate, and I'm wishing you all the best during this new season in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jenny.
Thanks for listening in. Be be sure to hit subscribe and visit heavenlytreasure.net for more. See you on IG at Heavenly Treasure Living. Till next time, blessings, and remember to be the salt of the earth.